Hey guys, it's Tyrant God. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your guys' patience. I finally uploaded this video. I ran into some technical difficulties with my cooling system on the computer, so that was down, which means a couple things. One, obviously, the video was delayed by almost a month. That was a big issue with it. Second, I didn't have all the memory I needed on my phone for kind of the entire recording process, so there might be some moments skipped, so bear with me there. And that's really just it, the lack of editing time and all that stuff. So I'm also using a new mic, same camera though. So we'll see how the mic's quality is. The camera will be about the same, which means, you guessed it, focusing is going to be a bit of an issue when it comes to the image.
Why is Chubby here staring at me? Focusing.
Yeah. Moving on, before we get into the assembly and painting of the models or the miniatures we did, we're going to go ahead and go through kind of a bit of a timeline, and I'm going to kind of show you kind of what's coming up next here in a certain order. Maybe you guys could weigh in on your opinions. I'd like to know what you guys would like to see in the future. So let's kind of get into that real quick.
So for the first video, we're doing 5 Space Marines from the Indominus box bundle. It's my very first time painting and assembling models, so it should be pretty informative. After that, I want to do a 1000 Suns video with either Rubik Marines or the Terminators, and I'll be using my airbrush and some magnets and some first time conversions, so I'm pretty excited about that. Afterwards, I need your help voting on this thematic terrain idea I've got going on for some future battle reports and stuff. But the downside of that is there is that big boy cost associated with it, so it's going to be cutting into my wallet, but I think it'd be really cool for future videos. Let me know if you like that, or I can do the one after that, which is the Adeptus Mechanicus bundle that I have, and it's really complex painting, but if you guys want to see my favorite faction on the board before the board, let me know.
Now that that's out of the way, I do want to go ahead and move on to the assembly and subsequent painting. And I'm also going to go ahead and list all the stuff I had at the bottom in the description, just in case if you guys want that equipment, tools, or paints, or whatever, you guys have that available, right? So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into that.
Alright, so of course we have our box of models with the Indominus bundle, and what I like to do before I get painting or assembling stuff is put on these gloves that make it so that way my hands that are a little bit sweaty when I get nervous handling things don't kind of slick up and mess up the models, so I like to use those. Lighting is super important, so you have clear lighting. Next, obviously, you have to have the instruction manual, very important to have. And then we have our sprue snippers for our models. We'll get into that later. Along with this knife over here, a hobby knife is always good to have. Try not to scrape with the straight edge, you'll cut yourself. I wouldn't do that. On top of that, we got these little tweezers here, really good for putting like the heads on models and to kind of help with kind of more niche spots. And then some files. Now I didn't really use this file so much, but I did use a different one that came in this little bundle here. Again, I'll put the link below. It comes with some pretty useful stuff like screwdrivers, microfiber cloth, extra blades. It does come with that hobby knife, but it's really not the best quality, so take it as you will. On top of that, we need some super glue. So I usually vouch for Gorilla Glue constantly, but it had some bubbling and drying, so instead I use this Loctite super glue, which works really well. It's got the little squeezy things to help the glue kind of out, and I really had a great time with it. And here we have the sprues for the Space Marines from the bundle, along with some other models there. And this is where we use the little sprue snippers. We'll get into that a bit later, so I don't want to really worry about it right now. Just make sure you pay attention to the numbers and stuff. And then we have our bases here. Now what I really liked is, even though we have all these different bases, on the guide, it does actually tell you the difference between like some of the smaller ones, so it's a really useful thing to have. On top of that, the instructions are very clearly labeled. It shows all the alternate options in different colors. Now we'll go ahead with taking the models, or their pieces I should say, out of the sprues here. And you gotta be very careful with these sprue clippers. You can cause a lot of damage to these models. So when you do find the right number, just make sure you're getting the best angle possible with these sprue clippers. Now with the knife, we're going to go ahead and use the back end to create some weathering and to kind of like trim down a few things, and that's not really a big issue. Now don't pay attention to that knife, running it towards me with the blade. I did end up cutting myself pretty badly earlier, so my advice, really stay on top of the proper form on that, because you're going to end up getting hurt. It's going to take you out of commission for a bit, and then you can't really work on what you're wanting to work on. So when I'm doing this here, I actually really like to use the file. It's a little bit better option than the knife and the clippers, because if you do a little bit of damage, you can actually file it out there. And this was probably my favorite tool in that little kit. Now if you're having issues kind of getting it to stick together when you're super gluing these models, what I also did was I took a little, hobby knife, coated it with some glue on one of the blades I was going to dispose of, placed it in there very carefully so that way I could kind of get the super glue in there, and then after a little bit of pressure, it sticks together. Additionally, when you do put the bases on, don't super glue the base of the model first and then put it on, because trust me, even if you think you've got it, it could be an issue. So just make sure that you get the correct pose, and then once you do that, you can just glue the base at the very bottom there. Now, we're going to go in and get started with, coating the bases here. In the future, I'm going to use different materials, but for now, we're going to use two of my favorite things, sand and some stones. And we're going to use some basic glue or some Mod Podge to kind of connect the sand, and then super glue for the quote-unquote stones. They're actually made out of glass. Now we'll go ahead and go with the sand. I'm going to put a little bit of that Mod Podge on there that I talked about, using a garbage brush that I didn't really care about, none of the fancy ones that I have. And once that's done, getting a nice thorough coating and base, I actually dip that right in the sand. After I shake it out, it's done. And here we are, this is what's left. So we've got the base models with their base sands and rocks. After that, I really recommend that you drill out the barrel to give it a more realistic look. You can take your time, you don't have to rush it, it's much better that way, and you don't have to worry about damaging the parts if you take it nice and slow. Now I actually skipped quite a bit of footage here, but once it's done you'll see that the barrel now has a divot inside it, so it looks a little bit more realistic. And then we're going to go ahead and spray paint the base coats. So I'm going to do a zenithal highlight where I start with black, and then I do a top-down white approach. And then on the next area here, you'll see that it kind of helps highlight some shadows and some highlight points and stuff like that to try and, give the base coat something to work with. Now I found out the best thing to use with these paints after I did these models mostly was I ended up doing 2 droplets of the paint itself and then 1 droplet of water. My only regret is if I had known that earlier, I wouldn't have tried to do 2 coats, and that really ended up messing with the project overall, and I'm pretty unhappy with that. You could say it throws off the rest of the project a bit, so don't do more than 1 coat, or yeah, you'll end up being disappointed. And of course here we have the models with their first base coat. The second base coat I'm not even going to show. Now with the second base coat applied, I went ahead and started on the holsters and the belts and everything that would use like leather brown, including like the stocks on the guns and stuff like that, and the weapons. After that, I went with the little parchment tags on there, the little seals, and I did a darker color than what you would normally do because my armor was already that color, so you kind of have to improvise. On top of that, I went and did a little bit of black, like squiggly lines to indicate lettering. I thought it looked kind of cool. After that, I did the rims of the medallions there in gold. Now, I would probably recommend doing red before the gold, but this way I did the gold as around the base there, and then I did red inside of it for the wax on the seal, and then I did another like touch-up coat of the gold, and it turned out pretty nicely. Now, this is like the third coat I'm putting on the helmets, and it won't be the last. I decided to do a little bit more contrast, so instead of having tan on tan, I'm just going to go ahead and have full black helmets as the contrast point. And then after that, while I'm here, I'm going to rim the pauldrons there with the black, because if I mess up, hey, it's just going to touch the helmet, which is already wet with black, so, you know, no big deal. On top of that, when you do these pauldrons, take a little bit of extra time so you can actually get inside and underneath them, because what I did is I flipped my model upside down. It really helps show where I missed. After that, you have the chainsaw sword that I'm going to go in and coat black, and then I actually coat the bolter in his hand black right after that. Make sure you get the gloves and the small details, because again, noticeable. Now is the point when I go ahead and get the metal on the armor, and I use a mix of gunmetal gray and bronze, so it gives it kind of a cool faded gold look. And I get the chainsaw blades, the chest piece, the belt buckle, and then I get the weapon barrel itself next, along with the captain indicator of the squad on the helmets of the lead. And then later on I'll get a few more points that you'll end up seeing, and I spent a little time on the details here, making sure I get like the bolts and stuff like that, because I do like my detail. Later on I even add on certain models little stripes or indicators on the weapons for little veteran statuses and stuff like that. Here I am doing the power pack on the back. I actually went ahead and went up a brush level because I wore out my super fine-tuned one. So just as a recommendation for new people like me, don't do the smallest detail brush you got, because you're going to wear it out way too fast. So the next size, or even the size up after that, is more than enough. And I mean, this is a guy with shaky hands telling you this, so if I got shaky hands, you probably got this in the bag. Now I used some of this time to put in some extra details, including my initials for my channel and my username and all that stuff right there on the chest. Now, I kind of freehand my own emblem, and this is the very first time doing it, so on the first model you'll see it looks pretty bad. All of this is freehand when it comes to the designs and stuff, so on other models you see subsequently that I did, it was much nicer. But my recommendation, practice on some paper or something before you do that. Following up here, I'm going to do the emblem on the right pauldron. Now I wanted to do the veteran symbols, so I went ahead and did a square to start with, and then took away some of the paint with the other color. However, in this part of the video, it looks like I've got the Iron Cross from Germany, and you can see how that's an easy mistake to make with the veteran symbol there, so later on I fixed that. And then I go ahead and do the lighting on the, the wrists and stuff like that, some of the extra pipes and all that stuff around the body, but mostly just the lighting on the wrist. And I'm very careful. I do use a pretty high detail brush here for this. And then after this, I use like a little bit of white paint to give the illusion that there's like a reflection in the screen. But I kind of determined that was a little bit too strong, so I went ahead and coated it again, not on the video, so that way it kind of toned it down a bit and didn't make it look so much like a toy. Again, just more touch-up work, hands, back of the legs, underneath the body, stuff like that. So the more you rotate the piece, the more, I guess, things you find that you need to fix. Now I go ahead and do the metal on the sides of the helmets, the little pipes going on there with the mask. So, you know, it's a nice thing to kind of take care of. And then they've got the little power pack in the back. And at this point, I've decided to redo the face with a 4th or 5th coat, which, you know, is getting kind of ridiculous at this point. It's, you know, it's like someone slammed someone's face in some cake or something, and it took away a lot of the details. So again, just do 1 base coat of the main color you want to do. Don't do 2 like I made a mistake with. Get the proportions right. It's on your paints. And then if you do end up, you know, having an idea, make sure you write it down and you don't kind of go back and forth on it. Get a clear image on what you're doing, because I kind of winged it a bit too much on this project. After that, I went ahead and put on the green on the eyes, the piping around under the shoulders, and then the little grenade or vial on the back of the body. And my recommendation, just use the regular acrylic for that. It's just not strong enough of a color. After that, I do a little bit of dry brushing. So that's where you take a brush, you put some of your acrylic paint on it, you wash it out basically on some paper towels, or I guess dry it out a bit. And then you do some light, very fast strokes to kind of indicate wear and tear, to give some texturing. And it ended up doing pretty good, mostly on the weapons, but it looked alright, which you'll see here in a second. And you know, if you make any mistakes when you do this dry brushing technique, you can always go back with another color and fix it. I'm doing more detail work here with the gold mix combination here to add a few more accents. No big deal. Purely optional. To prep for the wash stage, I just went ahead and dunked my figure in and then went ahead and put the paints on. Now with the wash, I used a very light wash on it. It still dyed a little bit darker than I was anticipating, but I did it like a lot of channels do and just put it on everything, all over the place in lots of quantities. Make sure you don't let it pool up too much, because that's a mistake I made that you'll see here. There's the base model, and then there's the wash model. And on the side, you know, on his right pauldron, you'll see I let it pull up, just like I said, a bit too much. But overall, I actually ended up liking the effect, because the wash gets in those crevasses and stuff and makes it really, really nice, or crevices, whatever. And makes it look really nice and in depth, and kind of help fix some mistakes that I did with the overpainting. I use Monster Brown and Leather Brown to kind of give the base kind of a nicer look to it. So, you know, it looks a little bit too toyish though, so I fixed that later. In the meantime though, since I'm not super careful with my main brush, I decided to use like a mud texture. And by using a stippling brush, I put some of the combination of paint I told you about just a second ago. And by drying it off a little bit, then stabbing it into there to give it kind of this appearance of mud texture on there. I think it adds a lot of character, and it adds a lot more sense than just having clean armor. So, I mean, this is kind of, you know, it's 40K, nothing's going to be clean. So, I do this on all the models, and I think it works out pretty well. If you have too much, you can just wipe it away. At this point, this is when I do that correction I told you about, where I do a dry brush technique with just some light brown. I go ahead and take some white as well and lighten that up, and then I do some nice and light strokes to add that texture on there. I know I said light a lot, don't sue me. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint the bases black on the rims. If you go too much over, don't worry about it. You're still in the stage where you can fix the bases. But I do 2 coats on here to really kind of not expose it and give that nice even coat on there. It looks pretty nice. As a legendary Bob Ross would have said, let's add some happy little bushes to this project. It really adds to the theme and really adds some character to each of these bases. And we've gone from some basic gray models that I put together to my very first ever assembled and painted models of all time, not just Warhammer. If you like what you saw, or you want to be part of our Discord and share your creations, whether you're a veteran or a complete noob like myself, go ahead and hit up locals.com and Patreon, subscribe, and I can go ahead and get you that link, and you can check out what everyone else is doing and really get a community growing. Don't forget to vote on that previous topic about my next project, and hey, until next time.